Welcome to the Social Media Using Social Media as a Clinical Trials Research Tool conference call. My name is Christine, and I will be the operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Erin Winstanley. You may begin.
Hi, thanks, Christine. This is Erin Winstanley. Thanks for joining us today. I am with the Ohio Valley Node of the NIDA Clinical Trials Network. I'm the Director of Dissemination. We've been using social media to disseminate information from the CTN for about 2 or 3 years now. And I'm going to give Gloria, our other speaker, an opportunity to introduce herself before we get started.
Hi, it's Gloria Miele from the Greater New York Node. I've been working as the training director for the Long Island and Greater New York Nodes since about the year 2000, and have in the last few years taken a real interest in how we can use social media to improve our trial performance. So happy to be with you all today.
Thanks, Gloria. We are going to be monitoring the Q&A dashboard during the presentation, and we're going to try to address questions as you have them. And additionally, we'll take questions at the end as time permits. So you can see the objectives today is to give you an overview of using social media, in particular in clinical trials research, addressing some of the IRB issues, some of the tools, and actually how to use the Facebook and Twitter, and then also reviewing finally some elements that you want to integrate into your social media strategies. So let's start with talking about how can we use social media in research. We can use it to advertise studies, to recruit and track study participants, maintain contact with research participants, communicate information to participants, drive traffic to research websites. We can use it to integrate into a community participation or exemption from informed consent plans, and to actually conduct research and online research in particular, of course, and disseminate research findings as we do here at the OVN. When we're thinking about device ownership, we've seen this over the years, how this is really steadily increasing. And so the latest data from the Pew Research Center says that 85% of Americans own a cell phone and 45% have a smartphone. When we're looking at the percentage of people who are using social network services, it is age contingent, whereby younger Americans are more likely to be using social networking sites. 80% of Americans aged 18 to 29 years old use social media, and therefore you can see that you want to consider the age of your research population to determine whether this is going to be a successful mechanism to communicate with that target population. The next few slides are examples of how Facebook pages are being used in research or in research networks. So this is a picture of the University of North Carolina's Research Studies Facebook page. They use this page to recruit and advertise studies for clinical trials. If you click on the like button, so you can see that here, you would be able to see their posts in your personal news feed. And additionally, the person who is the page administrator for this behind the scenes would be able to look and see what the demographics are of the 439 people that like this page to be able to get an idea, is that going to actually match with the target population that you may be trying to recruit for your studies. Here is another example from the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. They advertise as being the world's largest HIV clinical trials organization. If you click on the About button, you'll be able to see here that the group's website, and you can confirm that they are funded by the NIH and DHS as well as many other organizations. You can see here that they post videos about their network. They have conference information, and they disseminate relevant information to the folks that would be following them. And they recently, I just checked it today, they have recently posted a video that they are thanking their community advisory board. So I think that's a nice creative way to involve some of their research network members on their Facebook page. On this example, you can see that they're using it to advertise information about one of their network meetings. Although it doesn't look like many people went to the meeting, you can see only 3 people registered, at least using Facebook. But you can get information about the location, the dates, and of course the location that even shows up in a Google map. Here's an example from Twitter. And so the NIH Clinical Center uses Twitter to share health information and news, to disseminate online publications, to advertise and recruit for clinical studies, to communicate with other health leaders on Twitter, like the NIH Director, Francis Collins, and Kathleen Sebelius. And they currently have, you can't see that updated now, I checked it again today, they have over 30,000 followers, so that's a really large target audience that you're going to be communicating information to. So what should you post on Facebook or Twitter? So you can advertise employment opportunities to work on your clinical studies. You can share the results of clinical trials with the public. You can share journal articles with other professionals conducting clinical trials research. And this very first post here, you can see that people are using it to post toolboxes, essentially of tools for clinical trials researchers. So you're thinking here about the community being not only your target research population, but perhaps also your colleagues working in the field. And here's an example of a Facebook study ad. When you're posting information on social media, you can write text, but you can also upload study documents such as you can see here as recruitment flyer as a picture. And based on the OVN's experience over the past 3 years using social media, I can tell you that people really like pictures on Facebook. So it's a way to make it more visually interesting than relying on text alone. I'm going to talk a little bit here about setting up a Facebook page for a research study. In the past, we have covered how to do some of the basics of Facebook and the Twitter account, and so we're not going to repeat a lot of that here today. You can actually access that in the NIDA CTN library website. You can access our previous 2 social media webinars as well as our social media guide. And in this example that I'm going to be providing for you today, I'm going to be sharing with you a study that I have currently that I'm getting set up. It's called nasal naloxone for opioid overdose, and it's known by the acronym N3OD. So this is a mock setup of my Facebook page that I'm actually in development. You can see here on the top that this page has not been published, okay? So I'm working on it before I get IRB approval. I can submit the content to my IRB, and then once I get approval, I'll be able to go ahead and get this published. And it's a good way for me to show you some of the things that we're doing here. So you can see that we're using the same logo that's going to appear on all of our study materials and on the study website. You can write a brief description of the study. If you click on About, you can learn more on this. So in particular, to give you some more details, the way that we're using it in this particular study is this is an exemption from informed consent because we're enrolling patients that are unconscious, they have had an opioid overdose, and therefore are unable to consent at the time. As part of the guidelines for conducting this type of research known as EPIC, we have to have a community consultation plan. So in this case, we're using Facebook specifically as part of our communication plan to let our target communities know that we will be conducting this study. And so that's how we're using it in this study particularly. Here you can see here that you can, when you click on About, you can get a more description about the study, but still this is a very minimal space for you to describe this study. I don't know how many people are going to click 2 to 3 times to see the full details, so I think you're going to want to keep your information very brief and to the point. If you select on the Edit tab, you'll be brought to this page, which is the Page Info tab, and you can see here Page Info. You can set some basic information. So you can see here that I've named what our Facebook website page will be as far as on Facebook, again using the same acronym here, only having to add Ohio. We have 3 words to describe it, the short description, long description, and then of course a link to the study website, which I think is important because you want to have a way to communicate that this is a valid study and a place where folks can go to learn more details than are appropriate for posting given the short content of text on Facebook and other social media. If you were to click on the Settings tab, you can see a lot of the different restrictions that you can set up here. And so you can see you can control who can post to your timeline, you can set countries, you can set age restrictions, and you can set a profanity filter. So in this case, you can see that I've set my profanity filter to strong. I would prefer folks not to be using vulgar language on our website, our Facebook page. And this is a picture, a screenshot of our study website page, and it's just to make the point here that our Facebook page has a link to our study website, and of course you can see here on our study website that we're going to have a link to our Facebook page. Again, two different mechanisms to communicate to people and tools that we want to be able to be using as part of this study. On the next page, on the next slide here, we made this point in previous presentations, and I think it's always important to keep in mind to look up here and see who am I posting as, my personal account or my study page. For those of you that are familiar from previous slides, there is a link here that you can click on to see, am I posting as myself? Am I posting for the Ohio Valley Node Facebook page, or am I posting on the N3OD Facebook page? So you just want to be consistent about that when you're posting information. Additionally, here you can use private messages now. That's a fairly new feature. And you can invite your friends. I've blocked out my friends' pictures to protect their anonymity here, but I can invite my friends to like my Facebook page for my research study as a way to gain followers. Another tool that we can use here is to be able to post information about the study. And in this case, I'm going to be wanting to promote my Facebook page for the study as a mechanism to effectively communicate to the community as part of my community consultation plan. So here I can share this page to a group. I've talked about this group in the past, the 6 Scioto County Problems of Drug Abuse, Misuse, and Overdose. And so this is one of my target communities that is in Scioto County where we'll be conducting the study. And so I can post it to this. They have something like, I think, thousands of followers that would get information and invite them to actually like my Facebook page and to learn about some of the community consultation pages, events that we'll be having. So you can share information, right, by posting on your own timeline. You can post to a community or Facebook timeline as I am in this example, or you can tag individuals or groups in a Facebook post, again, a way to share it beyond the people that like your actual page. And you're trying to broaden your audience. And so when we're thinking about whether social media is going to be appropriate for our study, we might want to consider how the demographic characteristics can vary across the different social networking sites. So you can see here we're Facebook users. It's very popular among women and adults 18 to 29 years old, as we already mentioned. Some folks are using Pinterest, and then Tumblr you can see again at that target age group. So you don't want to assume that it's necessarily go-to Facebook, although that is the largest, most widely used social networking site. But you might want to take this into consideration given the demographics of your actual study. And at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Gloria.
Great, Erin. Thank you. I just want to add a couple of things to some of those best practices you were talking about because those are great. One thing is in that About section when you're explaining, giving a little summary of the page, it's really helpful to put the actual link to the website in the About section so that people don't have to go clicking through like you showed, and it would be right there on the page so that people want more information, they can go directly to your website. And then there are options and that might be more on events than on pages, but sometimes when you're sharing a page, you can actually determine the location of the people you know and share based on, for you, it would be Scioto County. So those are some other ways to maximize the development of a Facebook page. So now we're going to move on to organizational issues around using social media, and these are really mostly slides about security issues surrounding the use of social media. And most of these next set of slides come from sorry, it looks like it's a little bit cut off, an ATC training in telehealth. And so, and actually there is a web address that we can send you where you can look for the NFAR ATTC and actually see some of the resources they're developing. So this HETC is developing resources for training substance abuse treatment providers and administrators in best practices in integrating telehealth, which is any kind of technology that you use to further outcomes in treatment programs. And I feel these are incredibly relevant to the work that we do in our organizations and things that we need to think about in terms of security and best practices as we're using social media and the internet to interface with clients and potential research participants. So first of all, you want to obviously maintain physical control of your mobile devices and computer. Many of us now are working with laptops, iPads, you saw the smartphone data, and I just saw some data recently that 85% of business people have a smartphone. So when we're talking about providers and administrators and researchers, those mobile device numbers go up. And so it's really important, obviously, to keep control of your devices to protect confidentiality. I'm clicking on the wrong thing here, sorry. Another thing, since we are living in such a mobile world and tend to do our work in various places, we really need to be aware of the type of network that we're working from. And so if you're working in Starbucks, that is an unsecured wireless network. And your participant privacy is really compromised. So depending upon how you're using social media to communicate, you want to be sure that your networks are secured. Also, there is definitely, we're all sitting in coffee shops, working, sitting on a train, working, sitting wherever we're working, and sometimes we might leave a device unattended. Somebody can look over our shoulder and see some information that they shouldn't be seeing. So we want to be very aware of that as well. Password protect everything. And so that would be, again, your mobile device, your laptop. All of these social networks need a login and a password that you should set to a high level. You'd be surprised how many people have ABC123 as their password. It's not a good one. So making sure that our passwords are strong and that all of the things that we're using are password protected, both the devices as well as the different networks. There's also security software that we all should have on our devices, and we want to make sure that we have that software available and that it's current and activated. I know most universities have that for people who work there, and there are actually security updates for smartphones as well and mobile devices. So those are important to have. There's also these wiping and remote disabling programs that, depending upon the level of work that you're doing, the amount of secure information that you have, you might want to consider installing something like this. So this would be if your computer is stolen or if you lose it, you're able to, you can enable disabling of that device. So that is something to look into depending upon the kind of work you're doing. And then, of course, we just want to make sure that our policies and procedures really protect the privacy of our participants in research and obviously in clinical practice, and making sure that whatever we're doing, we want to guard against an unauthorized access to protected health information. So, relatedly, we're going to talk about some of the IRB concerns involved in using social media in research. And we talked about this a year ago when we did this presentation, and really we're pretty much in the same boat, that we don't have much guidance from OHRP. We have minimal guidance from the FDA. It has more to do with, the FDA guidance has to do more with drug companies communicating label versus off-label instructions. IRBs are really having to develop their own guidelines. And so it's important to work closely with your IRB to understand what those guidelines are. Also, the VA does have a policy, and it requires posting on an investigator's VA facility page, so they really want to keep control of the way people are using social networks, and that makes a lot of sense. But we really need to look to the guidance that we have available, the more general guidance around protecting participant privacy and participant rights that we do when we're creating any of our communication tools in clinical research. There is an Online Privacy Protection Act that does protect children under 13 years. You're supposed to be 13 years or older to have a Facebook account, although we know there are many kids out there who don't. And 13 to 17-year-olds are not to show up in a public search. So social media sites have these guidelines that they are supposed to abide by. There's definitely workarounds to that. I know plenty of parents who let their kids have Facebook pages and social media earlier than the age of 13, but there are laws that do restrict some of this access and restrict some of the public search. So those are important things to know if you're doing research with children, with minors, and to know that the common rule does not define the age of a child. So you kind of have to just, again, go with your IRB to figure out that kind of guidance. So here the common rule, information is private if a person reasonably expects it will not be observed or recorded, or if it is provided for a specific purpose and the provider reasonably expects it will not be made public. So this is the question. For social media, is there a reasonable expectation of privacy? I engage in social media with the expectation that there really is very little privacy. And so we really need to think about that as we're developing our policies and procedures and pages that we're using. So here is some IRB guidance from a few universities. And I really encourage you, if you haven't already, to check the university website or check with the IRB and see what guidance is provided. It tends to be somewhat general and goes back to the Code of Federal Regulations. So at Penn State, they say the guidelines are comprised of requirements and recommendations consistent with the basic IRB principles applied to all research involving human participants. And that, I think, is pretty much the blanket way that people are approaching using social media and the guidance that is being put out there. The University of Wisconsin says that they do not consider sites that require a login and password to be publicly available data. So Facebook requires a login, so they don't see that would be publicly available data. So if you are trying to collect data just by calling it off the internet, the IRB would not approve of that. So they feel that people have an expectation of privacy and don't expect that things they post will be used for research purposes. As I said before, I go in with the idea that very little is private, and so you really want to be careful about what you're posting and how you're doing that. And then in University of Maryland talks about how using computer and internet technologies requires that we still use voluntary participation and informed consent and address possible risks to participants. And so, again, we're just looking at the standard guidelines and making sure that we're applying them as we go along. So some best practices, definitely work with your IRB up front, understand what kind of guidance is available, and have a detailed social media plan in your protocol so that you can be very open about what those plans are and how you're going to proceed. Also, you want to include details about contacting people using social media in the consent form, including an explicit description of how the social media will be used to communicate with them. And we'll talk about best practices for that a little later. But basically using direct messaging, having very highly set privacy settings like Erin was showing before in those sample pages. Also, you want to include any potential risks, as we do for any intervention and in any consent form. One of the potential risks in using social media could be increased risk to privacy, or if you're talking about other electronic communication like text messaging, some people may still pay by the message, and so there might be increased cost, and we just want to make sure that we give that information even in the consent. More best practices that any communication that we develop that's meant to communicate with or recruit participants needs to have an IRB review, and that's just part of standard procedure. It's like any other kind of communication, like the recruitment flyer that we saw before, any kind of communication that will need IRB review, or at least you want to ask your IRB if they want to review it. You want to determine if you need a HIPAA waiver, and that will be site by site or IRB by IRB. And be prepared to address data security issues, how you're going to deal with those ISP addresses, et cetera. So those are kind of higher level things that your data management or data people at your site might be able to help you with and that IRBs might be concerned about. So those are some of those best practices as you're using social media in clinical research. Now I'm going to hand it back to Erin.
Thanks, Gloria. So much to think about in my own study, and especially getting approval for every Facebook post. That's concerning. Okay.
Well, what you would do is basically you have a script, right? You're going to have a script, and it's going to be the same kind of communication you're going to use in written form, but you're going to just use pieces of that same information that you can cut and paste into your Facebook page.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, in our case, when we're going to be using it to communicate with the community, and then there's going to be hopefully some dialogue, and so, it just brings to my attention that I'll have to be very much in touch with the IRB about those communications as this evolves, and we use this in this particular study.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment and using study advertisements via Facebook. And so what I did is last week I just decided to do a new literature search so we could bring the latest and greatest literature to you so you could move forward in your integration of social media into your research studies. So I found that there's really not that much out there. And so I called a couple of studies that I want to talk to you about that raised some good points. And definitely this is obviously a little bit trial by fire, right? You sort of learn as you're going along. So one thing I thought was important, particularly given that much of our research is related to drugs and alcohol, is that Facebook does have restrictions regarding the content and images related to drug or alcohol use. In particular, they have a policy that talks about not being able to mention any criminal behavior at all. So one study that I read was talking about they wanted to recruit study participants in relation to a marijuana study. They wanted to have a marijuana leaf in the advertisement, and that was not approved by Facebook. And so one of the things that is not just being aware of this, but being aware that you want to think about your timeline for advertising and allow time for your advertisements to be reviewed by Facebook, approved, and be prepared to alter your pictures and contents through the process of getting approved, and then also thinking about what is effective ways to communicate using these Facebook ads. So there is this nice study you can see here. It was published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research. I'm just going to show you a couple of slides. They had these really pretty pictures of successful, moderately successful, and unsuccessful advertisements. I don't have a marketing background. I'm not prepared to explain to you why some advertisements were more successful than others, but you can see here I'm showing you first the two advertisements that were most successful as far as getting the number of clicks or response rate to actually participate in the study. And you can also see the text here. It's very clear. The text is, that's right here. Take a UC San Francisco survey for a chance to win a $400 Apple gift card. I don't know. I might click on that. I would like $400 to spend in the Apple store. I'm halfway to the cost of an iPad, right? Here are two pictures of moderately successful advertisements. You can see one picture is a different cigarettes. One is a cigarette sort of burning down. So those were found to be fairly successful. And then just thinking about here in the last slide is what was unsuccessful slides. And so the article talks a little bit about how these cartoon pictures didn't seem to work well in advertisements. Do they not take it seriously? I mean, I can't really hypothesize about that. And again, there's not a lot of research. But just to give you an idea here, we're maybe staying away from the cartoon style, and also the picture of someone actually smoking. Reality-based pictures alone didn't seem to work very well. I'm also not entirely clear, you know, who that is, right? So it might be something to think about in formulating your advertisements. Again, and maybe in some cases you might want to even work with a marketing expert to understand how to do this for online marketing. The other thing that you're going to want to do, and you may already be doing in some of our studies, right, is to ask permission to contact study participants using social media, and you're going to ask participants for their usernames. This is helpful when we're trying to identify and confirm someone's identity. There's a lot of John Does, right, or there's a lot of Frank Smiths out there, and it may be really impossible to find that person on Facebook. And having that name, a location, and an age, it may still be very difficult to locate. If they don't make that information publicly available, again, it can be complicated to do that. In a study, I was just recruiting study participants last week. I was on site at the Substance Abuse Treatment Center, and they were really excited actually about me tracking them down on Facebook. So I didn't really see any opposition to that. So I think it's good. They know that they feel that their cell phones may come and go, they may lose them, but Facebook seems to be somewhat steady form of communication right now. But again, most importantly, getting permission from the outset. I'll talk about two studies where they were using social media. There are two different examples. And so this one is the Canadian Youth Survey. And so they're going to use Facebook advertisements to target a group of 15 to 24-year-olds. Again, what is this? The perfect target group for Facebook. So it's very appropriate for their sample that they're trying to recruit. They ask a very simple question, right? Have you been exposed to violence? So you need to be able to communicate in a very short amount of text what kind of person you're trying to want to click on the link to bring to your study consent page. And they paid a cost per click strategy, right? So you want to be able to narrow that down in a very succinct way so that you're not paying for a lot of people clicking but not being study appropriate, right? And here's a table from that publication where they're going to be talking about they've spent, to give you an idea of what is this reality and the costs associated of using Facebook to recruit study participants. So here they said they spent a total of $1,300, right, to recruit participants on Facebook. That led to 3,440 clicks. That's a lot of clicking, so a lot of people seem to like their advertisement. Ultimately, they were able to recruit 88 subjects, and the final cost was $15.35 per participant, and so they found that to be a very cost-effective mechanism to recruit for this particular study, and it seemed to work really well. But again, this is a very targeted question for a really appropriate research population, right? This study also saw, and again, we need to have other studies to see if this is going to be true, but they're looking at the total number of clicks here based on the day of the week, and you can see clearly the weekends, they're seeing a lot more people clicking on the weekends. So that's something that you might want to think about, the day of the week that you're actually advertising on, right? Okay, and in this other study we're going to talk about now, the trial for activity in adolescent girls. This is a multi-site randomized trial of an intervention to improve physical activity in middle school girls. So for everyone who's involved in the CTN who's on the call today, so this is somewhat similar to the type of work that we're frequently doing and we may be using Facebook for. So this study is talking about, they had an initial study, right, and they ended up being able to tag on a follow-up component that wasn't a part of the initial study, but they had asked at the onset of the initial study, they asked for the ability to recontact them for future studies. So that's what they're doing now. So it wasn't a planned follow-up. They're essentially wanting to re-recruit the original population and reconsent them for this new follow-up study. And the bottom line, what they found here is that they were able, using traditional strategies, so what we're talking about in this case, they went to schools, they did mailings because, of course, they had their mailing address from the initial study, and phone calls. They were able to recruit 75% of the original sample. And using Facebook, they're actually able to boost that up to 81%. And so that may be fairly significant depending on what the context of your particular study is. Here you can see is a picture of their website. Again, just to give you an idea, it was really nice about the multiple sites involved here, the documents, publications, and I also liked here that they had a secure login aspect of the study as well for study participants. So when we're thinking about using some, not just social media, but a lot of the tools now, web-based materials that are available, I think there's so many different things that we can think about. We can direct someone now, right, to a secure site where they can log in and you can have secured information about the study. This is a concern. We may be talking about it later, about people using social media and learning, study participants sharing information, perhaps about the clinical arm of a study, and we'll, I think, be talking about that more later. In this trial, one of the key messages that I learned from reading the study was that even though it was a multi-site clinical trial, they did use one person to monitor the Facebook page, and so I thought that was really an excellent idea. You can ensure that everything's, again, IRB approved. You have consistency and a singular voice and consistency in how you're responding, and so I thought that was a really great idea. They also really recommended that you keep those contact messages brief. This is not the time to ramble on about your study, about the risks and benefits. That's where you can drive them back or link them back to your study website. You can have a telephone conversation about that. You can have an email or a mailed letter, but they were more effective in all their communications when they were extremely brief. And when we mean brief, they were essentially saying, you participated in our initial study. We'd like to contact you about a future study. So it's very, very simplistic language and extremely brief. People's online attention seems to be fairly short. And also keeping in mind that they did not collect any study-relevant participant data online. They really only used this as a tool to locate and track study participants. So I think this was really great. And what they found ultimately for this trial, that it being free, it does cost, of course, a study staff time person to monitor that website, but compared to the other strategies that they were using to recontact study participants, that it was extremely less expensive compared to their other strategies. And I believe in their second and third phases of this trial that they're actually going to be relying more and more heavily on Facebook, since a large percentage of their study population has agreed to be communicate with the study team via Facebook. And now at this point I'm going to go ahead and turn that back over to Gloria.
Okay. I think that point about study staff time is so important and something to be thinking about as we're coming up with studies, and if you're responsible for budget justifications and for staffing, to make sure that if you're planning to use social media, there is time involved. We need to be monitoring what's happening on a Facebook page, and so having, as that study the other study that you mentioned, having one person be responsible for that or just designating people responsible, but making sure that you're adding that into the time commitment of maybe 15 minutes, a half an hour a day, but certainly per week and month that's going to add up, and that is the part where social media, it's not free, and can be costly if you don't have a good plan and some good boundaries around that. So there are a few other online recruitment tools that you can use. There are discussion boards that you could potentially post on. We've already talked about links on your own websites, but there might be other related websites that you can use. There's also blogs and email newsletters if people are using things like that. So those are other places to potentially recruit participants. Also, you can use your professional network, like on LinkedIn and even on Twitter, to connect with other professionals and share information about the research you're doing. And then there are some more public health studies that have used Facebook group pages for snowball sampling. So asking people who are already engaged in a study or who are engaged in a Facebook page that might be about a certain topic, like we saw that AIDS clinical trial, they could say, ask your friends, do you know other people who have, who are HIV positive? Do you know other people who are who want to quit smoking? Please ask them to contact us. So obviously that's, there are some methodological issues around that, but if your plan is to do something like snowball sampling, social media could be a good alternative for that. So on our last conference, we did talk about the CTN 44 study and how we use social media. And at that time, our data were not completely collected and were very preliminary. So I just wanted to take a minute to go through and give you some of those final results. The publication has been approved by the publications committee, and we are submitting that for publication. So we did use Facebook and social media. It ended up just being Facebook. That was the only thing that people really offered. But we did use Facebook to track and follow and locate participants in CTN 44, which was a web-based intervention with contingency management and outpatient treatment programs. And most people are probably familiar with that. And our original contact and locator forms did include email, cell phone, and texting, but did not include social media. So in the middle of the trial, or after the trial had started, it wasn't actually the middle, we asked if sites wanted to participate in using social media, and we were able to get 3 of our 10 sites to participate. All of them required IRB amendments and changes to their consent forms. And what they did was, for newly randomized participants and those returning for follow-up, they went back and asked for the social media contact information to try to keep in touch with them on the locator form. We really gave sites flexibility to implement it as they chose, and we used it as a way to just see how it was going to work without any a priori ideas about best practices, because at the time we implemented this, there really were none. So what we found, and if people are interested, I can certainly share more about the data with you, and you can just email me. But basically we found that the majority of the participants agreed to be contacted by email or texting, and that was over 50% for both. Participants were definitely more likely to respond to a text than an email. And so when you're thinking about, and I know that a lot of sites are having that experience, people are using texting a lot, and so it's something to consider. At the sites using social media, 2/3 of our participants agreed to be contacted, and as I mentioned before, using Facebook. And the 1/3 who did not participate, they said they either didn't have a social media account or didn't have computer access. And when we used Facebook, about half of of those contacts that we tried to attempt using Facebook were successful. Now, part of this, it was really a real-world study where there were not a lot of controls, and we collected pretty limited information, so we don't know if that is because the half successfully contacted, that could have been that people were already contacted using another method, and that Facebook was like a last resort. So there are some questions that still remain from this project, but we did definitely get some answers. So we did a logistic regression to see, looking at some of the demographic features of the sample of who was most likely to agree to be contacted by either email, texting, or social media. So if the people who were most likely to agree to be contacted by email were women, those who completed some college, and those who used the internet more frequently. So here we see reflected in what we know about use of social media and technology that women are more likely, and that education definitely plays a role, as well as how comfortable you are using the internet or how often you use it. In terms of text messaging, it was really younger participants who were most likely to agree to receive text messaging. So gender didn't matter, education didn't matter, it was just age that entered into the equation. And for social media, again, really reflecting what we know about the national averages, it was women, people who were younger, people who were employed, and those who used the internet more frequently were more likely to agree to be contacted using social media. So as Erin mentioned before, depending upon your study and your intended sample, you might have different rates of success using these different types of communication tools, but it certainly makes sense as those numbers are increasing every day of people who have smartphones, who access the internet, who are using social media. Those numbers just continue to increase, so it really makes sense for us to be using these electronic communication tools in the work that we're doing. So some of the lessons learned from the study and best practices, and we've alluded to some of this already, is really setting up a profile for your research team using the strictest privacy settings. So if somebody likes a page, that only those people can see what's posted. You want actually not to have people see what's posted. So you want those Facebook users only to send direct messages to the study page. That might be different for the kind of project that Erin is getting ready to embark on, because she's trying to create a community involvement, so it's a little bit different. But when we're talking about communicating with participants to try to track them and follow them, we're going to set up a Facebook account that only allows direct messages, because we don't want people to violate their own confidentiality. And in that, we don't want people to add friends to the study page, so you don't want a whole long list of the people who are engaged in that page. And Erin showed us where we can change those privacy settings on the Facebook pages. We only want basic study contact information to be visible to others, because this could, again, violate confidentiality. And similarly, we want to block posting on the page to maintain people's privacy. So Erin also mentioned that, how many John Smiths might there be out there, or Jane Does, and so we want to be able to cross-reference profile search results with other locator information, so maybe email addresses, or you might be able to look at people's friend list and see if it matches with the other locator information they've given you. So that's one alternative. You want to check your content with the IRB to make sure that it is approved and meets their standards. You want to note, so Erin showed a very nice grid from a contact and locator form, and you want to ask people what their preferred method of communication is, because some people it might be send me a Facebook message, that's where you can find me most easily, and other people it might be send me a text. But it's good to know and to ask up front. Now, usually we use all of those methods if we're if we're trying to find somebody, if the first one doesn't work, we're going to continue down the line, but it's always good to start with the most preferred tool. And then systematize the research staff's approach to using social media. So in our study, we didn't have a systematic approach, and so people were using, they were calling first, and if they got the person, then that was it. You didn't have to go to step B, but having that laid out in your plan is going to be very helpful to make sure everybody's using those best practices in a consistent way. So moving on to developing that social media strategy, one of the first things you want to think about really are what are your objectives. So we started out by talking about all the different ways we can be using social media to disseminate information, to engage participants, to follow up, to recruit. So it just depends what your purpose is and who your audience is. So if it's more academic and more disseminating information through to researchers and colleagues, that would be one way of setting something up. But if it's more clinical, you're giving information to the public, or you're trying to recruit participants, those are all different ways to use social media, and those objectives need to be clear when you're coming up with your policies. So some of the things to keep in mind are determining who's responsible for the social media activities. Is it one or two people? What is the scope of the content that you're going to be sharing? What are those privacy expectations that we've been talking about? Also, comment policy. So if somebody posts on a Facebook page, what is the policy around responding back to them? What kind of comments can you make? Maybe it would be just thank you for your interest, or we will contact you shortly. Whatever that is, it needs to be determined what the comments would be like. Also, we need to always attend to the federal laws and regulations, protecting participant confidentiality, which we've already talked about extensively, monitoring the content, and evaluating performance. Erin showed us how we can look and see who is liking our page, who's visiting our page, how is it working for us, are we reaching the people who we want to be reaching. And then by putting blocks and strong filters around profanity and things like that, we can address some of that might be inappropriate comments that we find on our pages. And this is, again, another reason why it's so important to have somebody designated to check and not, once a week I'm going to check the Facebook page. It really does require probably a daily, at least brief check-in to see what's going on over there. And having your settings so that you have an email notification when somebody comments can be really helpful, that you're able to get to something in a timely way. So if you're using social media in clinical practice, we want to definitely do some education with staff and employees around the limitations of privacy settings, any third-party access or storage issues that are involved, the permanency of the digital footprint. Again, I feel nothing is private, and when you put something out on social media, it is there. And even if you delete it, somebody else could have screen captured it and can share it. So we really have to be very aware of that. If there are any consequences of policy violations, we need to let our staff know that, and also information around laws applicable to digital communications.
Hi, Gloria. This is Tracy. So I know we're getting close to the end, and I wanted to still have enough time to ask those questions. So did you have anything to say on the legal considerations?
Basically, you want to know your workplace policy. If you can have your policy reviewed by an attorney, that's always helpful. There was a situation where a staff member was fired because they had posted something about a patient. It was a clinical situation. They posted something about a patient. It just so happened that patient was a friend of the person who posted, and that violated that patient's confidentiality. So we need to be, again, very careful, because you just don't know what 6 degrees of separation. And I actually met Kevin Bacon this year. So, see, things can happen. You just never know when you're going to run into those people. And then there's that last slide about creating the social media strategy, which we've already really talked about a lot of this. So,
right.
yeah, we definitely have some time for a couple of questions.
Right. Christine, can we open the channel for questions from the audience?
Yes, thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press the pound sign or the hash key. If you are using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up the handset first before pressing the numbers. Once again, if you have a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, too, I just wanted to add that monitoring your Facebook stream, particularly when you have people are able to comment, is always a good idea. I recently had a page where someone posted something about mail-order marijuana. So on the page, it was really not appropriate. So you want to delete it, and I actually did report it as spam. It was definitely inappropriate content on the page. So you want to be able to keep an eye on that kind of thing and make sure that you're keeping dialogues focused around where they should be and that they're appropriate, not just in terms of profanity, but the content, and is not offensive to the other people that are following your Facebook page. Do we have any questions?
We did have a question, actually, in the Q&A.
Okay.
One person asked, I'm curious if anyone has run into IRB concerns about participants in anonymous or confidential studies, liking or friending a page, and therefore disclosing their involvement. I think you kind of discussed that briefly, but were there any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, this is Gloria, just setting up, definitely that's a concern of the IRB, and by discussing how you're going to set up your page to block that kind of commenting, and again, it depends what your purpose is, but if you're using Facebook to try to engage participants and follow them, then yes, you would want to describe in your proposal how you will block all comments, you will block the list of friends to the page, you'll not allow free commenting on the page, and you'll just use the direct messaging feature. It really is just like email, but using Facebook as a platform for that. Anything else on that, Erin?
No, that's great.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, particularly our presenters, Erin and Gloria. Thanks again for continuing the discussion on social media, because more and more of us will be using it. And we will have this presentation and the materials available on the CTN Dissemination website, library's website, in about a week. And I encourage everyone to respond to our survey that will be sending to participants as we normally do. And then you're all invited to invite others to our next webinar on quality assurance and risk-based or strategic monitoring, which will be held on September 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you all, Erin and Gloria. Thank you so much. We appreciate this.
Thanks.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.